The maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility on the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This Honourable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mr. Samuda, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawu Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Ms. Smith, Mr. Main, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Dr. Chang, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Ms. Morrison, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright, Mr. Brown, Mr. Clark, Mr. Wilson.
House Leader.
Madam Speaker, there will be one statement today, and that will be by the Most Honourable Prime Minister, the Member of Parliament for West Central St. Andrew, the Most Honourable Michael Holness.
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I noticed that the House Leader abbreviated my name. I don't mind. It happens often. Madam Speaker, first let me say how grateful I am, and you could circulate, how grateful I am that the country generally was spared the full wrath of this tropical cyclone. We give God thanks. The prayers of many of us would have been answered when the system veered away from the island. While saying this, though, Madam Speaker, we did experience some impact across the island. Hurricane Elsa affected us over the weekend of July 3 to 4, with the island experiencing heavy rainfall over the 2 days. Though the hurricane was later downgraded to a tropical storm, it nonetheless dumped some 7 to 8 inches of rainfall on sections of the island. The Met Office is yet to collate all the data from the field, but indications are that the highest levels of rainfall were experienced in the southeastern section of the island. Hence, we saw quite a bit of flooding in sections of St. Catherine and Clarendon. Low-lying areas were particularly affected. Madam Speaker, the floodwaters caused silt and debris to be washed into some of our drainage systems. The situation was made worse by the presence of solid waste, such as old tires, plastic bottles, plastic bags, old stoves, and refrigerators in some drains. The rains triggered landslides, mud flows, downed trees, washed out drainage structures, and undermined roadways, which rendered some communities inaccessible at the height of the system. Thankfully, though, Madam Speaker, this situation was short-lived, as most of the roads were reopened very soon after the system moved away from the island. I'm pleased to report that we had no reports of casualties resulting from the passage of Tropical Storm Elsa. I want to thank the people of Jamaica for heeding the call to observe safety measures during the passage of the system. I continue to enlist their support as we navigate the rest of this 2021 Atlantic hurricane season, which we are told will be very active. Madam Speaker, the National Works Agency, by its mandate, assumed the central role in the immediate aftermath of this storm event by mobilizing equipment and personnel to clear blocked roads and restore temporary access to communities. The agency has conducted rapid assessments at locations where impact was observed and or reported. Through its network of officers in the parishes, the agency conducted a preliminary assessment of the damage and undertook work in order to allow for high-volume corridors to be accessible to facilitate delivery of critical services. Priority was given to those corridors along which first responders, such as the Jamaica Public Service Company or the Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management (ODPEM), would require clear passage to provide relief. These works consisted of clearing debris and garbage from roadways deposited by landslides or river gully overflows. Some temporary work also had to be done where surfaces were scarred and needed to be temporarily reinstated. Madam Speaker, several communities across the island were impacted by this storm. Damage to road infrastructure is of varying degrees, owing largely to the capacity of drains being exceeded or in some instances blocked by solid waste, as well as the generally poor condition of some of our roads, which require rehabilitation. The NWA's very preliminary assessment is that approximately 177 roads island-wide were affected by Tropical Storm Elsa. Madam Speaker, the NWA is reporting that there were no blocked roads as at Monday afternoon, except for the corridor from Old Harbour to Bannister in St. Catherine, which was flooded. The floodwaters have since receded, and the road is once again taking vehicular traffic. The works undertaken utilizing NWA's equipment to clear affected corridors was supplemented by that of private contractors under the agency's framework agreement. Madam Speaker, the estimates for flood damage are very preliminary, as the storm ended on Sunday, and the agency is continuing damage assessment to determine the cost for permanent repairs. The assessment to date is divided into two categories: cost to clean and clear roadways and drains of silt and debris, and the cost to make roads accessible. Regarding the cost to clear and clean roadways and drains of silt and debris, the preliminary cost has been put at 443 million Jamaican dollars. Another 360 million will be required to make affected corridors accessible. We are therefore looking at a total cost of approximately $803 million. Madam Speaker, these costs are based on equipment time, using standard rates and materials for filling washed out areas. These costs cover road maintenance, drain cleaning, creating access and patching. No cost for rehabilitation and other permanent repairs are included. Madam Speaker, I must point out that the cost to clean and clear the roadways and drains of silt and debris focuses on removing the physical obstacles on the road and providing clear access for communities. Much of this has been done. The cost to make the roads accessible, however, speaks to filling of potholes, grading and using shingle and minimum patching to improve drivability on the roads. We expect that this activity will be carried out within the next 2 weeks. The agency will continue to assess the damage, including inspections of all structures in areas where the intensity of rainfall was highest. This is critical as we want to ensure that no issue that can have serious impact on the lives of our people goes unnoticed. Assessments are also being done on the need for rehabilitation resulting from damage to the road network and drainage system. Madam Speaker, some of the affected roads include Alexandria to Greenock Bridge in St. Ann, White River to St. Anne's Bay, Hopewell to Ocho Rios, St. Anne's Bay to Green Park. In St. Mary, Broadgate to Toms River, Trinity to Fontabelle, Strawberry Fields to Orange Hill, and Port Maria to Islington. In Portland, Chipsall to Durham, Hope Bay to Chips Hall, Seamans Valley to Millbank, Alligator Church to Bellevue. In St. Thomas, Morant Bay to Port Morant to Pleasant Hill to Hector's River, Bath to Barrett's Gap, Bath to Hordley, Bath to Bath Fountain, and Morant River Bridge to Potosi. In St. Catherine, Spanish Town to Bogwalk, the Dyke Road to Highway 2000, Twickenham Park to Old Harbour Roundabout via Burke Road, Spanish Town to Bamboo, the Old Harbour Bay area to Bartons, Twickenham Park to Ferry, Nagohead to Dawkins, and the Old Harbour Roundabout to Gutters. Madam Speaker, I wish to urge members of this House to move quickly in assisting the NWA in having the first phase of our mitigation program completed. The government has made $100 million available for this purpose. I am aware that the program has been completed in some constituencies, but there are others which are lagging. I want to urge us all to have these activities completed within the next 21 days so that we will be in a better position for the rest of the season. Madam Speaker, while we have suffered damage, we know that it could have been worse. Again, I thank God for sparing us from the worst effect of this storm. Our sympathies go out to other countries that have been impacted in the Eastern Caribbean, as well as Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. Madam Speaker, we are only at the beginning of July, and the forecasters have predicted a season with above normal activity. In fact, so far for 2021, we are ahead of 2020's record-breaking pace. Last year's fifth or E-named storm, Edward, formed on the 6th of July, breaking by 6 days the record set in 2005 for the earliest appearance of the Atlantic's fifth storm of the season. Elsa's formation date of July 1st has broken that record by 5 days. Madam Speaker, it is not good to be breaking records from the busiest season on record. I therefore want to emphasize to ADPEM and all the ministries and agencies responsible for coordinating our disaster risk management to maintain a state of readiness for any eventuality. I take this opportunity also to urge all Jamaicans to undertake their preparations for the hurricane season if they have not already done so. This means ensuring access to critical supplies, fixing any leaks that you have, undertaking necessary repairs, ensuring that drains are clear, especially those that are near your property or run through your property. Have your evacuation plan in place, especially if you live in flood-prone areas or you know you are living in an area where you shouldn't have built. Madam Speaker, I decided to give this statement to highlight the threat of a storm to Jamaica. We have been spared any really serious impact over the last 6 years or so. Madam Speaker, we don't want to speak anything into being, but I think it is time, given the projections that have been made, that we take very seriously a potential impact. And that means for us, Madam Speaker, and for all the members of the House and for all Jamaicans, it means that we must be prepared. That's what it means. So, for those of us who are members of Parliament who have not yet done the first phase of our mitigation program, please ensure that this is done before the end of the month. Meaning that if you have drains in your constituency, select the most critical ones that impact the greatest number of persons and have those drains cleaned early. Madam Speaker, I will be working with the NWA to see what else we can put in terms of funding for mitigation so that we can do preemptive work in our areas. But for the funds that have already been allocated, let us use them and use it up quickly. Madam Speaker, our citizens must be prepared in terms of ensuring that in their homes, if they have trees that could potentially fall on their homes, on their roofs, that they should start pruning those from now. Madam Speaker, if they live in a vulnerable area, they live on a gully bank, if they live in a river course, if they live in low-lying, flood-prone areas, they should start making their evacuation plans. And it is not merely the route you will take to leave if waters come down on you quickly. Where are you going to stay? So start making arrangements with your families that you have around the island or close by. These are practical things that we need to do. Madam Speaker, I know there are some persons who will say, if a storm were to come, I am not leaving my house. History has shown that those people who say that cause great problems for themselves and for the government, because they then become the source of massive mobilization to go and save them. It distracts funding and resources from other areas. So I would like to dissuade those persons who may have that thought in their head, that if a warning is issued or an evacuation notice is issued, please abide by it. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Local Government announced that he toured the shelters and that they are in order. That seems to be generally the case, but I think, Minister, we have to tighten up on the response, meaning that, yes, we have identified the shelters, yes, the persons who should open them and make them available, they are aware, and that will happen. But people sometimes end up in the shelters without any food. So the response to the shelters, that has to be tightened up, Minister, because on the weekend, several cases came to my attention where persons ended up in the shelter and they were there with no food. So we have to tighten that part of it up, Minister, just to make sure that when persons do leave their homes, taking our advice, that the state is there to support them. And that we will ensure that aspect of the response, we will ensure that that is tightened up. Madam Speaker, again, I can only sound the warning and encourage Jamaicans to be prepared.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Prime Minister, for the update on the situation arising from the pass-through of ELSA over the weekend. And I just want to join with the sentiments expressed as to how relieved we all are that there were no lives lost in Jamaica, and to join with the expression of sympathies for our sisters, our neighbors, who were also impacted, and perhaps worse than us, in Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and of course Cuba. Prime Minister, I think there are a few things that arise from this. First of all, in a sense, to have been given this particular, to have gone through this episode so early in the season, in a way may have been advantageous to us, because I think it has focused everyone's attention on the need to be prepared. And it has also indicated, yet again, where the areas of vulnerability are to flooding and the like, so that the National Works Agency, the parish councils, municipal corporations, etc., and individuals in their communities can try to take whatever steps are possible to mitigate against a repetition of some of the unnecessary aspects of flooding which arise through things not being done which could easily be done. And I think this is very important, Prime Minister, because when it comes to the flow of water and so on, relatively small, simple things can sometimes have a pretty devastating effect by blocking the flow. And so if we are proactive in trying to eliminate or reduce those things, whether it be garbage in the blocking holes where water should flow, whatever it may be, the bang for the buck, so to speak, the return on that effort is extremely advantageous. So I hear you mention the idea of some perhaps funding that would enable some steps to be taken that may need to be taken before we have any repetition of this type of event. And I would think that would be a very good investment, because I think what this ELSA situation shows is that where preparatory work is done, the savings can be very, very significant. And we give thanks for rivers and gullies that may have been cleared recently. Even if it wasn't done perfectly, it may have been enough to avoid a calamitous repetition of what happened, let us say, last year, where those steps weren't taken or other things were done that made a situation more perilous. Going forward, of course, Prime Minister, the whole idea of resilience in our infrastructure is going to be more and more fundamental. You've pointed out that a record was set where a storm, a tropical storm, or a system that has an alphabetical letter attached to it, a name with E. This is the earliest E, I think you were saying, in history, July 1. So we know that climate change is real and that we are in a vulnerable part of the world, a small island developing state, in a zone known for various types of perils, and that we are going to be increasingly impacted by more and more frequent events of this nature. So how we adjust to it is very, very important, and a proactive approach to making our infrastructure more resilient, putting in a drain here, shoring up a fording there, whatever it may be. Those little things cumulatively can have a very important and salutary effect when push comes to shove and we have one of these major adverse events. And thank God we haven't had a very major one, a calamitous one, for a very long time, actually. And we hope long will that continue. But in the meantime, ELSA, I think, is a warning to us. It's a lesson to us. It says preparation is key. Maintenance is the most important form of investment in your infrastructure assets. And being proactive and smart about making adjustments that can reduce the severity of the impact of whether it be water flow or anything else, is the investment in those little things cumulatively can have a very positive impact. In my own constituency, when I visited yesterday, I was so pleased to see the gully that goes past Torrington Bridge, and which is really the border between West Kingston and South St. Andrew. There was no garbage in it, and it was just flowing like there hadn't been any torrential rain. I mean, there was water in it, but it was difficult to imagine that we had just gone through what we had gone through, seeing all the videos flying around social media and WhatsApps and seeing the extent of the flooding in so many places. I was very pleased to see that. And on the other hand, there's a scheme in my constituency that was built without any drainage arrangements, none. And of course, they suffered 3 different locations of flooding. And, you know, people get very upset about it. It creates conflict between neighbors, especially when people have built where water is allegedly, that used to be the flow, the natural flow for water to leave the community and that sort of thing. And I had to be kind of arbitrating between neighbors to try and find a solution that was consensual and made sense. But it does shows if we don't make the necessary smart decisions in the building out of the built environment, we pay dearly for it down the road. So, Prime Minister, you have our support on the idea of preparation for these things. I join with you in encouraging all Jamaicans to be very aware of what just happened and where the risks lie, and do whatever they can to put themselves in a position where they will be able to withstand a future event, and work with the authorities, listen to the advice being given and the warnings, and generally be a responsible citizen in the face of a calamitous event. So, Prime Minister, we will work with the government as much as we can to ensure that in our respective constituencies, we do what we can to prepare, and that we prepare the minds and hearts of our people so that we are as resilient and as proactive and as ready as we can be for the next one, whenever that may be. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
No, thank you. Sorry, no. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sir Prime Minister, I would join yourself and the Leader of the Opposition just to say that we are happy that no Jamaican have lost their life during the flood rains that we experienced over the weekend. But what the flooding has highlighted for us, as you have mentioned in your statement, it is a fact that we have been told by all the authorities that this is going to be a very active hurricane season. It is a fact, as you mentioned, that the government has or will be spending, as you mentioned, some members of Parliament have not completed their drain cleaning, but it is a fact that you're spending $100 million. This currently, as you said, phase one of phase one. But I've always said that when phase two is implemented, it's generally at the end of the hurricane season. And mitigation is supposed to be done so that we mitigate, we prevent the floodings taking place. But as the National Works Agency said at one of our committee's meetings, and it was published in one of our dailies, is that we tend to spend less at the beginning of the hurricane season and spend 7 times more trying to clean up and to bring back to normalcy the damage that has been done. Now, what ELSA has shown us as a country is that we are totally ill-prepared for any hurricane at all or any protracted period of rain. And why I say that is that the greater band of rain was north of the tropical storm. We were on the southern side, and we didn't even get the eye passing over us. But yet still, drains that should handle a small volume of water was not able to manage it any at all. That you're now budgeting $800 million to bring back to some normalcy, clearing of roads and rehabilitation of some of these drains. I've been saying to you, Prime Minister, that even though we know times are hard, I don't know if you sleep well at night knowing that we have not done the proper mitigation. But when I get $1 million from Northwest Manchester, I don't sleep well at night because of the size of my constituency, knowing well that, and I tell you, all rural MPs over on that side too know what I'm speaking of. But I can only clean only a few major drains in Northwest Manchester with $1 million. And when I saw the member Robinson's video of a drain in his constituency overflowing, coming onto the roadway, and we keep blaming Residents, yes, they have a part to play in dumping into these drains. But the fact is that we do not spend enough money on mitigation at the beginning of a hurricane season. We don't. That is a fact. So I want to hear from the Prime Minister. Will there be more that will be done immediately? Immediately, because ELSA is only a warning of what is to come. And if we were just on the lower side of the rain band and we got the damage that we did now, what can we now look for going forward? Boy, let me tell you, even if I get 50 million now, I couldn't fix the drains in the Northwest. But there are some areas, and it showed even in Bull Bay, Bullhead River, I think it is, the one that parallel to Wees Road. It shows it that if we prepare, how it is that we can then spare lives. Because it's a serious thing, Prime Minister, because even when we were told that the majority of the rain would be on the northern side, the southern central Jamaica got a battering. And these are drains that we would not normally see that would be giving trouble. So again, I ask Prime Minister, what can we look forward to? Because I know I have been getting calls from my own constituents who have been panicking because of some of the drains that were not able to manage the capacity of water. What can we look forward to?
Member, just before, I thought I heard the PM in his presentation say that he recognizes it and he's having discussions with the National Works Agency with a view, that was what the statement that I have in front of me says, that with a view to coming back to Parliament to letting us know what more we will get. In the meantime, Deputy Speaker.
It is not only an issue of mitigation. That is effective and useful. It is not only an issue of finding additional funding for drain cleaning, but also a cultural issue of education of our society. Madam Speaker, I was introduced to a word that I had never known for my entire life. Standing at the bottom of the road on Bull Bay, coming from Shooters Hill last rainy season, I saw bottles and garbage washing down like crazy. And I wondered what was happening there. The people said to me, Mrs. Holness, you have to understand, we're putting out garbage. And I was shocked. So I asked, what is exactly this? They indicated to me that sometimes they store these bottles and whatever has not yet been collected, the practice is when rain falls, they put out the garbage. And so it is critical for us to educate our citizens that times have changed. Because of global warming, because of climatic changes, what our experience was before is not going to be our continued experience. So in many areas, we have to keep our drains clean because the size of those drains can not manage the increased level of garbage that we sometimes have washed down into these drains. And so I particularly stood because work was done, mitigation work was done for Shooters Hill. The drains were clean prior to the rain, and yet still we were cleaning the drain during rainfall because the drain was blocked with garbage running down. So education is going to be very critical for our citizens in Jamaica, and each member of Parliament needs to ensure that we have a word with our constituents when we see them, so that over time they begin to appreciate what happens when they block drains with garbage or, as I've seen in many cases, with concrete.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I do wish to express my pleasure that we have not lost any lives in this round of flooding. But just one quick question for you, Prime Minister. You mentioned about the cutting away of the branches that can fall during the windy or stormy season that can contribute to blocking of drains. That is critical. However, in previous experiences when we have storms and the trees, limbs are all over the place, what was done is to make arrangements for those limbs to be taken up, removed by the Solid Waste Authority. I believe, Prime Minister, it will help as an incentive for persons to cut the trees and put them down in that they will be removed. Because I believe many people are reluctant to cut them and put them down and incur the cost of removing them. So if that could be in the mix to help to mitigate that challenge, I think it could be useful.
Prime Minister, I too share the view that, in fact, I am relieved that Elsa didn't behave as was earlier predicted. There are some of us who, once the cloud gets too dark, we start fretting. Because even before the rain comes, we know the areas in our constituency that are going to be flooded, whatever the amount of water, that amount of rain that falls. In my case, because Western St. Andrew is a coastal constituency, everything drains from north to south. So there are times when there's no rain in Western St. Andrew, but the flood comes nevertheless. And it brings with it just vast amount of debris and plastic and fridge and everything. So that even if you clean a few drains, once the rain comes, it's as if nothing happened, because it's bringing everything down into the constituency. In addition to that, Prime Minister, you know that the West St. Andrew is the only constituency in Kingston with a river that runs through different communities in the constituency. Luckily, because of some insistence that some work be done last year, we desilted aspect of. Shut your mouth, man. We desilted parts of the river. Some desiltation occurred. It may have helped, but we really don't know, because the rain, we didn't get the kind of rainfall that we were anticipating. We have over 40 drains and gullies in the constituency, over 40. And so when the Prime Minister makes a point, and correctly so, factually, that 100 million is being spent, when we get $1 million, I've said to him, I don't know where to begin. We have some of the largest drains, the Sandy Gully being one of them, that runs through the constituency. We don't know where to start. We have a lot of other drains, not as big as the Sandy Gully, but major drains that runs through the constituency. So, and yet when I tell the people we only get $1 million, they're incredulous, because the Prime Minister said 100 million is being spent. It's as if all of it is being spent in Western St. Andrew. So there needs to be the matter of equity, the issue of equity. You can't have a constituency that sits at the coastline, drained as it is from the north to the south. And we get the same with a constituency that doesn't even have 2, 3, or 3 drains they can count. The matter of equity needs to be looked at. And it's a serious concern, and it is affecting the morale and the development of the constituency, because many drains that needs to be cleaned accumulatively, year after year, not cleaned, and it put at risk the lives and property of people in the constituency. Prime Minister, I again bring that to your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I too want to join in thanking God that He has spared us once more. There are other islands and countries that cannot say the same as us, so we'll have to give thanks. And I want to just say to all of us now that we can't take anything for granted. Over the weekend, I was very, very nervous because the calls was coming left, right, and center because people were expecting the worst. And we have to give thanks that, you know, we are spared. But I would like, Prime Minister, that we start to look seriously in terms of partnership. We have to have partnership now with solid waste in terms of making sure going forward that they don't believe it is just a routine thing, but as soon as we expect, especially any severe weather, that they come on board immediately. Solid waste, because we have a serious problem with garbage collection in this country. And as a result of that, it helped to create more problems in terms of flooding. In respect to JPESCO, the big trees and those trees that we have our JPESCO lines run through, the people are very worried, especially when it starts to the wind and all of that. And we have a number of them. We normally have a routine thing that you have them going around looking at doing maintenance work and to ensure that their lines are free and clear. I don't believe it is done enough. And coming into this kind of season, it is very critical that they go out now, examine the areas that they need to maintain in order that we will not have any more disaster apart from any natural one that we are expecting. And I just want to say to you that I believe that there are some simple low-hanging fruits that we can do. We have to start doing some at least 3 months maintenance. We must look at some of the major ones that are going to create problems. And even if we're not giving everybody an allocation, but to ensure that we do maintenance work, we cannot get money probably twice per year or 1 time per year. And we have areas that are fully flood-prone areas. And again, I want to agree with the member who spoke about educating our citizens about how we treat our garbage, because it is going to play a very critical role in terms of mitigation if we have this active season that we are anticipating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, like the members who spoke before me, I also give thanks that there were no lives lost, and that in terms of damage to property, it is not as bad as we had anticipated, notwithstanding the damage we have seen to public roads and so on. I believe that public education is important, and I know that I have seen the public education campaign, but it is true that based on some of our cultural norms, it is something that is deep-seated, and therefore it is going to take quite a bit more in terms of getting that culture to change. Permit me to, Madam Speaker, a couple months ago, I partnered with the National Solid Waste Management Authority in a community where we were having serious problems with garbage collection. Came through, looked on the number of bins that were required, got a partner, got some bins, and we have been monitoring it. And the truth is that we ask persons to bag it and bin it. But as simple as that sounds, there are a number of individuals who can't afford to buy bags to put it in. That is the reality that we face. And that in and of itself creates a challenge. Whether it is the dogs who are going to turn it over, whether with the rains and the force of the water, that gets turned over and then is swept away. And so I would want, when we are speaking, to call on the public to do better. But I also want to make sure that we are conscious of our cultural reality and that we understand some of what is happening. Prime Minister, I penned a letter earlier today, which I guess would be on the relevant minister's desk by tomorrow, because Marcus Garvey Drive, right before, when I realized that Miss Elsa was coming, I made a couple of calls just to find out what to expect and so on. And I was satisfied with the work that was done a week or so ago and what I was told was done. But lo and behold, we saw what happened to Marcus Garvey Drive. Now, it is true that we recognize that that's a major infrastructure project that is going to be required because the drainage in that area just needs to be fixed. And I know that the question is always going to be, where's the money to come from? Yeah? And it's always hard to get money to do things beforehand. Of course, when the damage is done, we find a lot of the money to do the fixing. So that is something to look at. But I am really concerned about Marcus Garvey Drive. It is not enough just to tell motorists to divert. There are going to be individuals who are going to come in and not realize what is happening. There are those individuals who live along there, and we would have seen the major cry as well from our corporate neighbors in terms of the damage that is being done there. What is also true is that in a constituency like Southwest St. Andrew, where we have that major drain along Marcus Garvey Drive, believe me, to clean that, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of partnership and a lot of creativity to be able to clean it so that we can avoid some of the things. Granted, I am pleased that it was not as bad this time around as it has been in the past. And so we give thanks for small mercies. But I also want to remind us that apart from the garbage that goes in there, in the gullies and drains, that many of our drains are really blocked by siltation. And what that does is that it allows the floor of the gully to be higher, and therefore the water that goes through is closer to the surface, and it overflows much easier. And I think we would have seen in a number of other countries some creative ways of preventing some of the silt from going in. And I think we need to begin to look more comprehensively as to how we include those kind of strategies of preventing the silt from going there. Also, sometimes we don't recognize, and I want you to look at this, Prime Minister, that mitigation is not just about cleaning the drain. Because sometimes mitigation is about repairing the drain. Yeah? Because where a wall has fallen into the drain, what that means is that everything that comes down is stopped. And again, we have that flooding. So Marcus Garvey Drive is my real big issue. And although we have that bypass, and the member from Western St. Andrew will be pleased in terms of the work he had done with others on Chesterfield, we have an old bridge that is now abandoned, and that's one of the letters that I've written, that is now abandoned, that is not being used. But it is so low that whenever rain falls, you are going to find trees and other stuff stuck. And individuals have to risk their lives, as I've seen them doing in other places, to remove that debris to allow the water to pass. And the residents have asked me, can we just please get rid of that bridge? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, members, for the comments, the questions, and for generally participating in this debate. Madam Speaker, I wish to start with the issues raised by the member from North Western Manchester. Are we going to spend more on mitigation? It is our intention to do so. I can't say how much we're going to spend now. The Minister of Finance is here, so I'm certain that he too suffers the same problems that we do, so I'm sure he will be very sympathetic towards an allocation in preparation for any other event, weather event that may occur. Suffice to say, however, that it is not a matter of shifting the routine maintenance schedule. We clean not just for the hurricane season, but we also have a rainy season, or rainy seasons rather. And so we intervene preemptively in anticipation of weather events in those seasons. One of the seasons that we'll get a lot of rain is the hurricane season, and therefore we spend before that, but we do get some heavy rains earlier in the year, March, April, thereabouts, and we get some at the end of the year, November, thereabouts. So we try to spend just preemptively, just before those happen. So so I don't want members to have the view that it is about shifting from one schedule to the next. That doesn't solve our problems. We for this year, based upon what the professionals in this area, in the weather area, tells us, that we may have more weather events than normal, and therefore it would be justified for us to make an allocation in addition to what we have already placed in the budget. Now, to the other point made by the member from Northwest Manchester and others who have spoken, yes, there are many drains in constituencies. In mine, I possibly could have more than 50. Certainly in my neighbor in Western, he would have more and probably larger and longer drains. The issue is that the government isn't making an allocation to be able to clean every drain. That's not what we would be able to do, or nor do we have the capacity to do that. The allocation that is made with the MP's discretion could not be considered an allocation that would solve the problem. So remember now, there are allocations made from the NWA directly, which would deal with the issue raised by the member from Western St. Andrew about equity, meaning that his constituency, truthfully, may have more drains than most, and more critical drains, because most of the drains collect in that constituency. And therefore, as you would have mentioned, for example, that constituency would be the beneficiary of a desilting program. No other constituency would get that. So the NWA, in its allocations, would help to create some form of equity. Not what you're looking for directly, but it would have to allocate in strategic areas. Then local government does quite a bit of drain cleaning, and they have a routine and a schedule. I'm not here in Parliament presenting on what local government does, but I'm certain that if you were to take the budget from the central government, the budget from the local government, and the budget from NWA, what they spend, you may not be at 100%, but you probably be close to 50% of the problem. Close to 50% of the problem. My estimate. That's my estimate. Now, let's just be fair. Not every single drain is in need of cleaning and repair, and every time. And so the idea is that the Member of Parliament should have what I call the ability to rapidly respond to the critical ones. And so you have to use that $1 million. And I'm not disputing the fact that this is something that we have to talk about. I don't want to drag out the conversation too much, but it's something that needs to be properly explored. I'm not saying that the $1 million is sufficient. Let's agree it is not sufficient. But can it have an impact? Yes. Can it have a greater impact if used with greater synergy with what is allocated from the local government and what is allocated directly from NWA? Yes, greater synergies can be had. There is a lot to be said about how these mitigation works are done. A lot to be said, and greater scrutiny needs to be paid as to how they are done. Because we all inside here know and understand the stories that go on with them. So, some of it doesn't always end up in the drain. Well, the truth is it all ends up in the drain. Sometimes going down the drain. Yes. So Madam Speaker, I'm saying I agree we need to spend more money on mitigation. I agree that for the hurricane season, and in particular for this season, that we may have to make additional allocations just to be on the safe side. Yes. But let us understand that shifting resources from one maintenance schedule to the next doesn't solve the problem, because it is not just one period of time within the year that we face a weather event or a weather threat. And secondly, whilst the resources may not be enough, if members of Parliament and councillors were to use the funds with greater efficiency, we could have a greater impact. Now, Madam Speaker, the other issue that has been raised by the member from South St. Catherine about, I had made the suggestion in my presentation that a preparatory exercise would be to prune trees or other threats to your house that would be close to your house, to remove them, loose debris that could affect you during a hurricane. The question is, persons may be reluctant to do that if they are not given some certainty of the collection of the debris. And I would take that on board, and I will try to put a program together. As we have done before, we have done a cleanup program to remove debris from household debris, refrigerators and cars and so forth. So I'll work with the Minister of Local Government to put a program in place that we could go through various communities, mobilize it locally, and have, with adequate notice. And I take that suggestion, and I will work on that. Madam Speaker, without question, I don't have to belabor the point. The member from East Rural St. Andrew made it, and supported by the members from Southwest St. Andrew and St. Catherine Eastern. There has to be some cultural change. The challenge that we face is how we see and treat the built environment, and in particular, the civil assets that we have. So for many Jamaicans, we are not seeing the gully and a drain as an important asset to protect our assets. We see gullies and drains as places to dump things in. And I think that's the biggest cultural change that has to happen, so that the citizens are properly informed and educated that these civil assets are important to be protected and not to be destroyed in how we use them. The argument, the retort is always going to be made, where do we throw the rubbish? That's the most convenient place to throw the rubbish. Again, it comes back to education as to how we treat with our rubbish. But yes, it also comes back to a more efficient public bureaucracy in terms of the collection of garbage. And that is not something we can be proud of. We've just not done it very well. It's not funded properly. And it has been a challenge. We do have some strategies in place to address that. At another time, I will report to the House where we are with establishing a proper waste-to-energy system and a proper system for collecting garbage. That I will come to the House with shortly. On the Marcus Garvey Drive issue, again, I'd addressed this earlier this year, well, last year when we had those rains, and those plans are underway. And it will be a little while, but those plans are underway. And lastly, Madam Speaker, just to point out that when it rains here, especially during this season in the summer, there is also the potential of a dengue outbreak. The Minister of Health, we have been discussing this, and he has started to mobilize the team for the spraying right across the country. And some of you, for fogging, you will probably would have noticed an increase in the mosquito population. So we are targeting that, we are working on that. But again, it comes down to how we as citizens behave, how we treat with our environment, our immediate environment, tires, pots and pans, how we treat with those, and keeping the drains and gullies flowing. So, Madam Speaker, again, let me thank the members. Yes, we will make some additional allocations for routine maintenance in a preemptive way, and I will put together a program so that we can assist households in the removal of bulky waste and materials that would have come from the removal of branches and trees that are threatening to households. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper numbers 46 and 47 of 2021, and annual reports on audited financial statements of the National Irrigation Commission Limited for the years 2018-2019 and 2019-2020. Third annual report of the Integrity Commission for the year 2020-2021. Statement J, Statement of Receipts and Payments of the Contingency Fund of the Accountant General's Department for the year 2013-2014 and 2014-2015. Report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew West Rural. Report of the Joint Select Committee on its deliberations on the bill shortly entitled the National Identification and Registration Act 2020. Head 72,000A, Ministry of Local Government and Community Development for the year 2017-2018, and 72,000B, Ministry of Local Government and Community Development for the year 2016-2017.
Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the second day of July 2021, the following bills were passed in the Senate. 1. A bill entitled An Act to Validate and Confirm as Lawful the payment of fees in variance as to amount of fees prescribed under Section 24 of the Legal Aid Act, and to provide for indemnification in respect of such payments, passed without amendment. And 2, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Extradition Act to provide for the admission of evidence that would not otherwise be admissible under Jamaican law in the form of records of evidence of the case in extradition hearings and for connected matters, passed with 2 amendments for which the Senate desires the concurrence of the Honorable House. And the amendments are in Clause 2 in the proposed Section 9.2a,
delete the words "a corresponding offence" and substitute therefore the words "an extradition offence." And B, delete the words "an offence" and substitute therefore the words "an extradition offence." Signed, Thomas Tavares Finson, OJC DQC JP, President of the Senate.
Madam Speaker, I now ask for your consent that the Senate amendments to the bill shortly entitled the Extradition Amendment Act 2021 be now considered and approved.
Consent is given, Minister.
Madam Speaker, there are two simple amendments. That is to remove the words "a corresponding offence" and replace it with the words "an extradition offence," and also the words "an offence" and substitute therefore the words "an extradition offence." These are just to make the phrase tidier, Madam Speaker, and I ask for the House approval.
Members of the House, your approval is sought for the amendments. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it, Minister. Go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Petitions, papers, reports from committees.
Brought on behalf of the Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew West Rural.
Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the report of the Joint Select Committee on its deliberations on a bill shortly entitled the National Identification and Registration Act 2020.
Notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I will move, be it resolved that the Capital Development Fund withdrawal number 1, Order 2021, under the Bauxite Production Levy Act, which was laid on the table of the House on July 6, 2021, be approved.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Ethics Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the motion for the exemption brought on behalf of the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew West Rural, which was laid on the table of the House on the 6th day of July 2021, be approved. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move, be it resolved that the report of the Joint Select Committee on its deliberations on a bill shortly entitled the National Identification and Registration Act 2020, which was laid on the table of the House on the 6th day of July 2020, be approved. Madam Speaker, we hope next week to take the report and also the bill through all its stages. We have had 31 meetings of the committee, and I hope next week we should conclude the debate on the report and also on the bill.
Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to sittings of the House, motions for leave to introduce bills, presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained, public business.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Deputy Speaker to take the motion, notice of which she gave earlier. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, I now ask that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
The question is that the motion, notice of which was given earlier, be approved. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, finally, Madam Speaker, today represents a significant milestone in our long journey to provide protection to many women and men who are suffering the harmful effects of sexual harassment. But, Madam Speaker, just before I go into my presentation, and I'm provided by the orderly with the... Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, just before I make my presentation, I would like to make reference. Thank you. Madam Speaker, I'd like to make reference to a gift that each female member of Parliament received last Tuesday and today, a gift celebrating Canada Day, July 1, and also a gift celebrating our women in Parliament. In December 2020, Madam Speaker, we had a celebratory breakfast to honor all women who participated in the last general election. At that time, we were joined by our friends from the Canadian High Commission, who pledged to present portraits to each of the 18 women in this House and to the female Minister of Government in the Senate. Last Tuesday, most of the women here were presented with their portraits. And today, the remaining women who did not receive their portraits last Tuesday are now in the possession of their portraits. And Madam Speaker, just so that everyone will see, this is the portrait that was presented to each of us. Madam Speaker, women have made remarkable progress in leadership, and I could not envision a more fitting day for these portraits to be presented to all of us in this House. Like these portraits today has captured impact and is a profound reminder that for us to have real impact, we have to start somewhere, and today is the start, Madam Speaker. So, today represents a significant milestone in our long journey to provide protection to many women and men who are suffering the harmful effects of sexual harassment. Today, I open the debate on the report emanating from the Joint Select Committee of Parliament appointed to consider the Sexual Harassment Act.
This is a signal of the progress we have made dealing with this very, very serious matter. Madam Speaker, your committee convened a total of 24 meetings and initially began its work during the 2019-2020 Parliamentary session on November 28, 2019. At our first meeting, we decided to give an opportunity to stakeholders and the wider public to make submissions on the bill. In that regard, we wrote to 22 organizations, including government entities, academic institutions, and the private sector, requesting feedback. During the 2019-2020 Parliamentary session, the committee held 6 meetings to deliberate on submissions received pertaining to the bill. We heard submissions from Ministry of Labor and Social Security, Ministry of Tourism, Jamaica Network of Seropositives, University of the West Indies, Institute of Gender and Development Studies, Jamaica Coalition of Healthy Societies, Women's Empowerment for Change, We Change, Jamaica Lands, Hugh Shearer Labor Studies, Institute Consortium for Social Development and Research, University of the West Indies Open Campus, Jamaica Aid Support for Life, and Mr. Douglas Seriton. We also placed public notices in the main newspapers on 3 distinct occasions, inviting written submissions from individuals and organizations. The notices were published on December 8, 2019, February 2, 2020, and July 20, 2020. After the general elections, your committee was reestablished and held its first meeting on October 28, 2020. At its second meeting held on November 12, 2020, the committee agreed to adopt the previous submissions and oral presentations. Additional submissions and oral presentations were received from the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, that's the Rent Assessment Board, Norman Manley Law School, Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions, the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, Girls Who Know, JA, Association of Women's Organizations in Jamaica, Jamaica Household Workers Union, Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, Independent Jamaican Council for Human Rights, Seroptimist International Jamaica, Bureau of Gender Affairs, United Nations Development Program Jamaica, Jamaicans for Justice, and Mr. Matondo K. Makulu. This committee held 18 meetings, Madam Speaker, 6 of which centered around submissions made relative to the bill. Subsequent to the completion of that process, all submissions were compiled and put into a matrix. The committee thereafter held 11 virtual meetings to review the matrix of submissions. The amendments attached to this report benefited from the submissions made by various public, private entities, and individuals. This report, coupled with the amendments, represent the consensus of your committee and will, in our view, yield a more robust legislation. Time will not permit me to highlight each amendment, Madam Speaker, so I will focus on a few critical areas. Let me begin with our recommendation for fit and proper criteria to be inserted into the legislation. After much deliberation, we accepted the need for fit and proper person criteria in the legislation. These criteria would stand as the benchmark for all considered appointees to serve on the Sexual Harassment Tribunal. These criteria are not a new legislative construct, as previous legislation, including the Anti-Doping in Sport Act 2014 and others, utilize these criteria. The purpose of the fit and proper person criteria is to create a rubric by which any potential appointee will be assessed to determine such person's suitability to function as a member of the Sexual Harassment Tribunal. The legislation would now consider a person fit and proper if A, the person, 1, has not been convicted of an offense involving fraud, dishonesty, or moral turpitude, or of an offense listed in the second schedule of the Proceeds of Crime Act, or an offense that is similar to any such offense in another jurisdiction. 2, is not a bankrupt within the meaning of the Insolvency Act. And 3, is in compliance with any tax and other statutory requirements imposed on the person. B, the employment record of the person or any other information does not give the minister reasonable cause to believe that the person carried out any act involving dishonesty or impropriety that will interfere with the ability of the person to fulfill his or her functions. And C, the person is, in the opinion of the minister, a person of sound probity and is able to exercise competence, diligence, and sound judgment in the fulfilling of their functions. 2, a person who possesses the knowledge, skills, and experience which are necessary for the intended functions to be carried out by that person. And 3, a person whose appointment will not raise an issue of conflict of interest or undue influence. Madam Speaker, I also wish to highlight the requirement for the institution of a sexual harassment policy statement within 12 months. It was considered vital that the policy statement of every organization and place of institution be instituted within 12 months. This means that no workplace or institution has the luxury of choosing when to effect compliance with this part of the legislation. Within 12 months from the date of commencement of the Act, every employer and person in charge of an institution shall ensure that the policy statement required under the legislation is prepared and shall take steps as are reasonably required to bring the policy to the attention of each worker, client, student, resident, ward, inmate, patient, or member as the case may require. To aid those concerned in meeting this timeline, the legislation has a sexual harassment policy statement template in Schedule 1, which provides the necessary guidance to entities on how to construct their respective statements. Madam Speaker, our recommendations also address the matter of maintaining a confidential register. The need to maintain a confidential register in sexual harassment cases is crucial. This is so as many complaints of sexual harassment are often made internally before any judicial involvement arises. Under this legislation, an employer or person in charge of an institution have a duty to keep and maintain a register. Such a register will detail all information relative to a sexual harassment complaint to include A, the name of the parties to the sexual harassment claim, B, the particulars of the sexual harassment claim, C, the date on which a sexual harassment claim was lodged, D, any action taken by the employer or person in charge of an institution in relation to the sexual harassment claim. E, such other particulars relating to the sexual harassment claim as may be prescribed. An employer and person in charge of an institution shall ensure that the information contained in the register is kept in a secure manner and that the confidentiality of the information is preserved, and shall A, take all necessary and appropriate measures to protect the information contained in the register from unauthorized access, unauthorized use, and unauthorized disclosure. And B, ensure that any person who has access to the register adheres to the measures referred to in paragraph A at all times. No person shall disclose information which is recorded in the register in relation to a sexual harassment claim unless the disclosure is made with lawful authority. Madam Speaker, after much deliberation, your committee agreed to widen the categories that can be sexually harassed. The committee agreed that sexual harassment can be perpetuated by clients from one student to another, and that employers can be harassed by employees. The limitation of action was the subject of frequent debate in the initial stages of the bill. Having considered all contending views, the committee agreed that the time limit allowed for the reporting of sexual harassment cases should be 6 years and not 12 months. And you know that was a very controversial matter. Further, the committee recommends that the tribunal be empowered to enlarge time, which means granting permission to a complainant who complains out of time to bring his or her matter to the tribunal. Such permission should only be granted once the complainant can give reason as to why the complaint was not made in time. Madam Speaker, we also considered the review period for the legislation. The initial bill had a review period of 5 years. However, the committee felt that given the unique nature of this legislation, an earlier review period was necessary. The earlier review period would evaluate the efficacy of the systems and structures that will be involved in the use of this legislation. For those reasons, it was agreed that a review period of 18 months would be significant. Madam Speaker, I wish to again express our sincerest gratitude to everyone who took the time to make presentations to this committee towards the development of this legislation. We thank them all for their contributions. On a personal note, Madam Speaker, I wish to thank the members of your committee, which I had the honor to chair. Madam Speaker, the diligence, the unity, all boded well for a productive working relationship. There was never any division on this committee, though we contended at times with divergent views. It was a wonderful committee to work with, and I really felt honored that I had the privilege to chair this committee. The process was ably supported by members of our technical team from the Attorney General's chambers, the Legal Reform Department, the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, my team from the ministry, the clerk and staff of the Houses of Parliament, especially the committee clerk, the Hansard writers, and the technical team. The combined efforts have produced the document before the House. I ask my colleagues to please applaud the team that worked on this legislation. And so, Madam Speaker, I, of course, at this point invite my colleagues to make their contributions, as I intend to take this matter through all the stages this afternoon. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you so much.
Madam Speaker, I give rise to support this bill. This is a significant advancement in legislating the protection of women and indeed men from sexual harassment, having had the benefit of significant consultation of a wide cross-section of stakeholders. I am indeed mindful that as legislators, we must consider the cultural context into which we choose to introduce legislations, especially legislations which require a cultural shift in successful application. I am therefore, Madam Speaker, challenging us as a people to embrace the necessary cultural shift that this legislation brings in the interest of protecting the vulnerable and in making our professional spaces more civilized, while at the same time being sensitive to some of the cultural nuances of our communication style as a people. It is therefore important to consider carefully the definition as outlined in the Act, Section 2. Sexual harassment means the making of any unwelcome sexual advance towards a person by another. Any. The section further goes on to giving several bits of details, and I will expound on 2. Sexual suggestions, remarks, innuendos, any sort of verbal, non-verbal, even visual contact of a sexual nature. Many of the actions that men and indeed some women find to be culturally acceptable in some quarters will become very problematic as a result of this legislation. And guess what? Rightfully so. We must steer our society away from normalizing some of the negative tendencies towards objectification of each other. We must therefore guide each other, even through legislation, to appreciate that unwanted and unreasonable sexual advances are not okay, and nobody should feel forced to have to accept them in a civilized society, in order particularly to progress professionally in any workplace. If Jamaica is to be the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business, we must encourage a cultural shift which makes the workplace, the educational institutions, or any business place a safe place where people are free to function and advance their intellectual and functional merit without having to worry about doing certain favors. I am happy for this piece of legislation, and yet I caution us to be responsible with it. We need each and every one of us to exercise mutual respect in this critical process of building a fair and just society. I am pleased that harassment is qualified in the context of an unwelcome advance or overture. This gives the power and the duty to ensure, for the avoidance of any doubt, that we respectfully and unequivocally state our displeasure or disinterest in any advance that is unwanted. Don't be afraid to do so. It is going to require significant behavioral change on all sides, but for the law to function, we must be fair to all. This bill, this instrument, is balanced in that it also places a duty on employers to foster the right environment for the protection of the vulnerable within their employ. I am happy that there are consequences for employers who fail to provide this well-needed support that is indicated in the bill. And persons reading on will realize that the responsibility extends to employers even in our households. Those persons who are employed in private spaces are captured here. We invite all well-thinking Jamaicans to read this piece of legislation, become familiar with it, discuss it, educate your colleagues, educate your children on it, so that Jamaica may, under God, continue to increase in beauty, fellowship, and prosperity. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I am extremely pleased as one of the members of the committee to speak today as we discuss the report on the deliberations of the Joint Select Committee looking at the amendments to the Sexual Harassment Bill. Madam Speaker, it was after we had actually completed the deliberations that I found a publication by the CPA UK that actually looked at legislations across the Commonwealth and recognized how much this particular issue was facing Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, it is a little difficult to be interrupted and distracted by those who have spoken already. But I thank you for the opportunity to continue. This publication that I'm speaking of, Madam Speaker, really spoke to the need for us to actually ensure that across the region, parliamentarians were enacting robust and comprehensive gender-based violence legislation, monitoring the implementation of these policies, and holding their executive to account in making legislation more effective. I was very pleased when I looked at the summary of findings to know that a number of things that they were asking legislations to do, that these were in fact the issues that we were contemplating. And so they spoke to the need for legislation to be comprehensive, covering prevention, prosecution, protection, and provision of services to survivors, most of which we would have covered. I know that elsewhere we are looking at provision of services, and that would be one of the areas to look at in the post-legislation scrutiny in terms of just ensuring that we cover that. They also spoke of making sure that the legislation aligns with other laws and that, in fact, we do a thorough review of the legislative landscape. And so the idea of reviewing the legislation in 18 months, for example, is an important one to make sure that that is so. As we continue, as we went through the deliberations, I know that we were conscious of the other laws that existed and what might have been some of those provisions. Yeah. I tried to figure out what's happening. Somebody said stop. Madam Speaker, I want to obey you, but I also don't want to come across as a crass, uncaring individual and member of this Parliament. Five minutes.
Of the House, adjourned for 5 minutes. House is adjourned.
Because I didn't see anything in it. I'm wondering what. Yesterday talking and trying to figure out what's happening over there.
Three factors can help you make safe choices when you're in an area of widespread COVID-19 transmission. Consider the location, the proximity to others, and the amount of time you spend there. Where does your activity take place? Open-air spaces are always safer than enclosed spaces, particularly if they're small or without fresh air. Proximity to other people is also important. It's safest when there are fewer people around and you can keep more than 1 meter apart. How long does your activity last? The shorter, the better. Think about each of these factors and avoid situations where the risk dial is high. Small or poorly ventilated places and crowds of people for long periods of time. Stay safe. Lower the risk to yourself and others.
Bureau of Gender Affairs mainline at 876-754-85778 or call the helplines. Females call 876-553-0372. Males call 876-553-0387. And remember, there's absolutely no excuse for abuse.
Jamaica, land of wood and water. That's Jamaica, once covered with lush forests and rivers with clean, clear water. But only a small fraction of our natural forest is still standing, and our water is becoming more and more polluted. But all is not lost. Clean, clear water flows underground deep in Jamaica's heartland, the cockpit country, rising as springs which flow into rivers, giving many people in the west of Jamaica their water. All these communities get their water from Cockpit Country. And all that water under Cockpit Country is covered and protected by Jamaica's largest remaining natural forest. Living in this fantastic forest are so many plants and animals. Many of them are found nowhere else in the world. Living around the forest are people. Cockpit Country gives farming communities clean water and fertile soil to grow a lot of the food Jamaica eats. Cockpit Country is where the Maroons fought the British and won. It's a symbol of resistance and triumph. Cockpit Country is water. Cockpit Country is people. Cockpit Country is Jamaica's heartland. We must protect it.
Start again so that you don't lose the gist of your presentation.
Let me see how I continue.
Or where you would like to. Yes, please.
I was saying earlier, Madam Speaker, that looking at a publication out of CPA UK, they were looking at the legislation and what we needed across the region. And Jamaica is no different from several other Commonwealth countries. And they noted the need for comprehensive legislation that covers prevention, prosecution, protection, and support, provision of support services. I know that in what we are doing, we do all of that in terms of gender-based violence and so on. But even in terms of sexual harassment, the idea is to make sure that the legislation covers all of that. I think most of it would be covered. We just have to look at the provision of services and see how that is properly covered. They also spoke about ensuring that the laws align with each other, and we have been doing that, looking at a raft of legislations to make sure that they align with each other and to make sure that they are aligned with also our international commitment about protecting individuals against gender-based violence and sexual harassment in this particular instance, and also looking at that legislative landscape. I was saying earlier that the 18 months to review the legislation also allows us to engage in something that we don't do consistently and timely enough, which is post-legislative scrutiny, which would look at how the legislation is implemented, what are the issues, what are the unexpected, even cultural hindrances that we find in terms of the implementation, where are individuals who are seeking protection finding it difficult, even though we actually have the legislation. So I'm pleased that we are there as well. I spoke also about that wide and thorough consultation, taking into consideration cultural, customary, and religious differences. And I'm pleased that in the discussions that we had and the invitations that we made to individuals, corporate entities, academics, NGOs, civil society, all of that was in fact taken into consideration. They spoke about legislation being ambitious and aiming to reach beyond legal frameworks to achieve a wider cultural transformation. And so many times during our deliberation, that really was the discussion that we were having. How do we ensure that this bill that we were crafting was not simply on paper, but that it did in fact have the force of changing cultural norms, and we know just how difficult that is. The discussion itself brought out some of those cultural norms, and there were even comments made that we almost had to check each other to make sure that it was in keeping with the work that we were doing. There's also that idea of just making sure that what we call consciousness raising or awareness raising is key. That's the public education part of it. And Madam Speaker, that I think is extremely important. We have spoken about that, so that is there. There are probably two areas, well, one area in particular that we did not include, and as I said, I saw this afterwards. We thought about it because we spoke about how we change cultural norms. But, Madam Speaker, what is clear as we have been looking is the importance of including education programs for school-aged children and campaigns for a wider reach. So we didn't get into the details, but I am expecting that this is going to be part of what we do. In fact, I would have mentioned, I think, in my sectoral presentation, even the need to make sure that our teacher training institutions begin to look at gender sensitivity and to ensure that the curriculum is gender aware and that our teachers are helped to examine their own cultural biases that might be at work and to get them into that gender sensitivity training. We did not include in the bill the training of individuals on the tribunal and so on, but we did agree to have that included in policy to ensure that it takes place. And so I'm fairly comfortable that that is important and that will be done. I know that we have started the education around other pieces of legislation, and so this would be covered as well. But I think it is also important to make sure that the training takes place with our police, with the court, and all individuals who are involved in administering and implementing the policy and the legislation. Madam Speaker, the Minister spoke about the bipartisan approach of the discussion and the Joint Select Committee. And I must say that, yes, it was a very difficult conversation at times, but we managed to stay focused on the important aspects of what we're talking about and to get over our party one-upmanship and to concentrate on the bill. I wanted to just say some of the things that I'm particularly pleased that we were able to do, and one of that is to make sure that there is in fact a specific clause in the bill, or will be a specific clause in the bill, that is relevant to the age limit. And I know we have also agreed that we would also look at relevant legislation to ensure that there's no lacuna in terms of the individuals that would be covered, whether they were minors or not, or depending on the ages. I'm also extremely pleased, I think someone said that earlier as well, that third parties are also covered, not just the employee and the employer, but that also individuals who come into the establishment, for example, who would sexually harass an employee, that too is captured. And I know we had a big conversation around third party, and I'm pleased to know that we were able to find a way to actually put it there. I am also pleased that we are recommending that we look at all relevant legislation, Sexual Offences Act, Child Care Protection, and so on, to make sure that there is no lacuna in the rest of the legislation to cover all of the things that we were talking about and that we thought were important. Minister spoke already about the template, which we thought was necessary to ensure that we could have a speedy implementation of the policy, especially for smaller businesses and for those who are not fully abreast with the conversations that we have been having. One of the things that I noted is that legislation alone will not end sexual harassment. If it were, it would have been eliminated in many other places. So if legislation alone will not end sexual harassment, where else do we go and what else is required? And before I leave that, I want one of the areas that I really was concerned about was the issue of street harassment, because the majority of the instances of harassment, sexual harassment, really take place on the street, and that was not covered by this particular bill. I am pleased that we were able to get from the minister a commitment that we would be looking at specific piece of legislation to deal with to deal with street harassment, because I also know that a number of individuals who came before the committee were also concerned about that, given its prevalence and given the fact that it constitutes a large percentage of the instances of sexual harassment. So I was speaking about, if not legislation, then what else do we need? And so what it seems is that legislation, yes, is important in providing that framework, but we also need to make sure that we send a strong message that violence against women is not acceptable, that sexual harassment is not acceptable. And so, Madam Speaker, as I think about that and as I look at that, I thought to myself, as a parliamentarian, we have gone through the legislation. What is the next thing that we have to do? And as leaders in policy making and leaders in legislative reform and in actually making these pieces of legislation, I believe that we have a duty. We have a duty individually and collectively to enact strong laws, which I think, based on the report and based on our suggestions, is where we are headed. We also have that responsibility to hold government accountable in making legislation more effective. As I said earlier, the post-legislative scrutiny is important to look at those gaps and what is preventing the legislation from being as effective as it could be. And in fact, we need, even apart from that, we need periodic review to make sure that we can cover all of those issues that would be there. Madam Speaker, how do we send a strong message to the society and to Jamaica that sexual harassment, that violence against women is not acceptable? I believe it is going to be extremely important, Madam Speaker, that in all the things we do and say in here, persons will not call us hypocrites. That in all the things we do and say, we hold our own to the highest ethical standards when it comes to sexual harassment or gender-based violence. I believe that every time we stand and we speak, that the public is looking at us, and they would want us not just to talk the talk, they would want us to walk the walk as well. And so, Madam Speaker, I know that you would expect that as I end, that I would also want to say that the greatest signal that this Parliament could send to society, that we mean it, all of us across both sides, because that's the other thing. What is required as well, Madam Speaker, in these times, even though the conversation is a difficult one, because we do have a member amongst us that individuals have a narrative going out in the public domain. We have to find, as difficult as it is, that space for a conversation, not necessarily in the public glare, but behind closed doors, where we can reach each other's thoughts and hearts to say we have a duty. We have a duty when we pass laws to protect victims, that when those individuals that are close to us and associated with us are also found to be in breach, that we will stand without quivering, without cowering, without any equivocation and say wrong is wrong. Madam Speaker, I must say, we do not, at this point, I believe, have the moral authority to others who would call us hypocrites. I do believe, however, that the individuals who sat on that committee and that the majority of individuals in this House are individuals who recognize our responsibility, who also recognize the cultural, the toxic cultural norms and how difficult those are to change. But we cannot run away from it, Madam Speaker. We cannot hide from it. We cannot hide from it. And what the eyes have seen, the mind will not forget. And therefore, whenever we have a chance to see an individual being pummeled like an animal, being beaten, we have a responsibility to do what we can to make sure every member who steps through that door knows what is acceptable behavior and what is not. That we set a code of conduct that will allow individuals, when we speak, to listen to us. It's difficult, Madam Speaker. It is hard to prevent the partisanship and the repartee around this conversation. But our country demands more from us. Our country demands honesty. It demands integrity from every single one of us inside here, that our behavior be above reproach, and that those who are amongst us who do not find that to be the case should do the honorable thing.
Before you do, Dr. Brownberg, thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm of the view that the nation has to arrive at the level of consciousness where we see sexual harassment as a human rights violation. I believe that we ought to lift it to that level where it goes even beyond our borders, beyond individuals, but we see it generally as a gross violation of the rights of the individual. Madam Speaker, when we look at the Memorandum of Objects and Reasons, the first paragraph reads that at present, sexual harassment is not specifically recognized in any existing legislation in Jamaica. However, there is consensus that legislation is necessary to address concerns about sexual harassment, which is employment-related, occurring in institutions, or arising in the landlord and tenant relationship. Madam Speaker, I am happy that this forms a part of a suite of legislation connected to safeguarding the right of the individual. I'm happy to embrace the purpose of this bill, which essentially serves to protect the rights of persons. And we hope that the provision for sanction will serve as a deterrent to offenders within the workplace. But I also desire to see a greater overarching effect which is about changing mindset, and societal norms, which gives validation to sexual harassment. Madam Speaker, I will look briefly at 3 points. 1, the statute of limitation. That's for 6 years, up to 6 years to report an offense. Thank you, member, for explaining it to me so excellently. This time acknowledges the mental challenges that the victim may need to resolve before coming forward, issues such as fear, shame, feeling that they may be targeted or victimized. It also cautions individuals that an offense will not disappear overnight and that their quality of life may weigh in the balance. So there are individuals who may say, why come forward after 6 years? The person has moved on with his or her life. Chances are the persons involved may have migrated, their life chances have changed, but a strong argument is that while you have moved on, this individual is still shackled by the experience. And as the saying goes, that the axe may not remember, but the tree will never forget. Madam Speaker, I noted the concern of Member Brown-Burke and the advice that she gave about holding each other in this House to the high standards. And I'm right there with you, Member Burke. I also support holding all public officials to the highest standard. Member Wilson, you would remember the other day we were in conversation, and you said to me that as a member of Parliament, you ensure that when young women come to your office for help, you ensure that the door isn't closed, you ensure that the environment is sanitized, so that no young woman will walk away feeling as though, because you're a member of Parliament and because you're in a position to assist her with a school fee, you may so victimize her. Because you see, Madam Speaker, what the ears have heard, the mind cannot forget. And therefore, we have to be careful in our exchanges, Madam Speaker. And I say this without quivering, without cowering, that as members of Parliament and as public officials, we ought to ensure that within the workplace, not just in Parliament, not just in an office, but it could be the constituency office where a vulnerable young woman comes to you as a member of Parliament. You want to ensure that your behavior is of a certain rectitude. Let's take a stand. Madam Speaker, the second point that I wish to speak on is that I'm satisfied that the bill includes in the definition of workplace small businesses, because it's not just about the huge corporation, Minister Grange, because those small workplace, those you talk about, let's even say our wholesale, it forms a large block of the worker and employment scenario in Jamaica. Now, I raised at committee level, and it was a concern shared by others, a scenario where there is no formal HR structure. Now, to whom does the victim report? Let's say it's a family-owned business, and a worker may feel that he or she is being sexually harassed by the supervisor. But the owner of the business is the father of the supervisor. Now, to whom will that person report? Who do you go to? And that's a scenario, that's a realistic scenario here in our workplace. And so you may even find many young women, especially, when they look at the hopelessness of the situation, it no make no sense me go to the boss, go report, because the boss I'm father. So it's easier to walk away. Madam Speaker, I'm so happy that I think it's in clause 12. It deals with the designation of authorized officers, field officers in the Bureau of Gender Affairs who will function as investigators of complaints. And I strongly encourage public education, accessible means of making complaints, and high capacity for responsiveness. The young woman in Geisel or Mount Industry, my seat for example, must not feel that he or she will have to take the bus all the way to town to file a complaint. That's prohibitive. And I'm hopeful that this bill will not just languish, but will play a significant role in preserving human rights and dignity. And the final point that I want to make, Madam Speaker, I'm looking at the offense and the penalty for a person who knowingly makes a false complaint. There was some debate that the maximum fine of $1 million, that it ought to have been reduced. But it was subsequently agreed upon that this figure was appropriate. Madam Speaker, I applaud the decision to impose a fine in such circumstances where the person knowingly makes a false report. Madam Speaker, I have no difficulty. I'm okay with 1 million, but I even have no difficulty with a member who may feel even more strongly. We want to make the point that ruining a person's reputation, ruining a person's career, ruining a person's family, ruining a person's reputation in their community is not something that ought to be taken lightly. And, Madam Speaker, false accusation destroys a person's character. And even long after it is borne out that it is false, the damage has already been done. And I'm very happy that there is clear penalty for this. Madam Speaker, in closing, I just want to emphasize that the unseen hand that guides this bill, it's really about a call for us as a nation having respect for each other. May it so please you, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I'm just going to call the names as I saw them. It's Member Crawford, Member Davis, Member Hanna, and Member Terrell. Those are the hands I have seen.
No, I took it off because I too tall.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to offer my full support to the passage of the bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Act 2021. In recent weeks, there have been renewed calls for us lawmakers to move with alacrity to enact sexual harassment laws. I am therefore delighted that debates have commenced in this regard. Madam Speaker, having had the privilege to serve on the Sexual Harassment Joint Select Committee, I wish to commend Member Grange for her exemplary chairmanship
the committee members present and past for their reasoned contributions, the varied institutions and groups for their meaningful submissions, and the technocrats for their guidance. Madam Speaker, it is no secret that sexual harassment is very prevalent in societies. The article Perceptions and Reflections on Sexual Harassment in Jamaica reports that in 2004, the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, received 13,136 charges of sexual harassment, from which 15.1% of those charges were filed by males. The report further states that in 2003, EEOC resolved 13,786 sexual harassment charges and recovered 37.1 million in monetary benefits for charging parties and other aggrieved individuals. The same article reports that a study by the European Commission in 1999 found that between 40% and 50% of women employed within countries of the European Community received unwanted sexual proposals. Madam Speaker, in our very own Jamaica, it is found that sexual harassment is embedded in our culture. It has very much become a social and cultural problem occurring under a variety of circumstances in multiple spaces. As lawmakers in a civilized society, we have a responsibility to protect all our citizens from unwanted sexual advances and ensure that provisions are made to punish perpetrators irrespective of their status. Consequently, I welcome the provisions made in Part 2, Clauses 3 to 6, which speaks to the prevention of sexual harassment. For you see, Madam Speaker, these provisions will compel employers and persons in charge to make reasonable efforts to ensure environments that are free of sexual harassment, thus essentially eliminating the common practice of ignoring or trivializing victims' complaint of sexual harassment. Madam Speaker, even as we seek to take the necessary steps to impede the practice of sexual harassment by rightly imposing legislation to punish offenders, we are similarly charged to ensure that provisions are made to dissuade individuals from deliberately making false claims. I am therefore happy that the bill before us speaks to provisions in Part 9, Clauses 39, to impose fines and/or penalties for those who knowingly make false complaints. This is very necessary, Madam Speaker, to safeguard the reputations of individuals who may fall victim of malicious claims. Madam Speaker, while we take this necessary step to introduce this needed piece of legislation, it is my belief that we will have to do a bit more to eradicate our existing culture of sexual harassment. To this end, permit me to call for an aggressive campaign to socialize, re-socialize, educate, and re-educate the populace into understanding what sexual harassment entails. The populace must be made to realize that unwelcome sexual advances in any form is a human rights violation that can no longer remain unpunishable by Jamaican laws. This campaign, Madam Speaker, could be spearheaded by the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports in collaboration with the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information. Madam Speaker, I thank you on behalf of the people of Manchester Central.
Madam Speaker, thank you. It gives me great pleasure to rise in support of this bill. It cannot be overstated how important and how significant this piece of legislation is. Notwithstanding that, I will not be repetitive. This bill is a balanced piece of legislation, and the best example of this is the tribunal. Section, I believe, Clause 25 speaks to the composition of a tribunal. Now, the importance of this is twofold. The existence of this tribunal puts us in the modern thrust of legislation. That is, we are no longer requiring our parish courts, our supreme courts, to deal with these sensitive matters, but a tribunal has been set up to hear these complaints solely. Quite apart from that, is that this legislation specifically sets out how it is to be composed. It says attorneys at laws, mediators, and persons who have experience in these matters. And that is important, because it is not enough to have these complaints brought before us and then at the end of the day, justice is not done. It requires that experts hear these matters. I will read, because of its importance, Clause 11, Subclause 2. It says, pursuant to subsection 1, at least one half of the total members appointed to the tribunal shall be females. This is important. It tells us that the balance that we seek to get is beginning with this legislation. Now, the question was asked earlier whether persons will know where to go. And that is what I really admire about this legislation. It is easy to read and easy to understand. I quite agree that a public education campaign will be necessary. But even in the absence of that, you are directed to Clause 25, which sets out step by step the procedure to be followed to have your cases heard. Again, the penalties have already been discussed, but it highlights and shows the importance that we have placed on this legislation. May it so please you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much. Member Hannah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know if it is an omen, whether good or bad, that since the start of the debate we haven't seen one male member of the House actually contribute to the bill. But I'm hoping.
It's never over until it's over.
It's never over until it's over, Madam Speaker. Permit me, Madam Speaker, if you may, to join with the other women who have spoken before and the other members of this House who have made a contribution to this bill. I've enjoyed the presentations by those members, and I want to tell them how pleased I am that they have taken such an interest in the bill so far. Madam Speaker, many of us would remember, and I'm sure you would too, back in October 1991, when through public confirmation hearings, Professor Anita Hill courageously brought to the global consciousness her personal experiences of sexual harassment by her then supervisor at the United States Department of Education. As it turned out, her supervisor was the U.S. Supreme Court nominee, Justice Clarence Thomas. And back then, the national attention Professor Hill received was not because of her esteemed qualifications, but more for her brazenness that she would dare to embarrass and prevent the first black man from being elevated to the United States Supreme Court. He was the former chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee that conducted the hearings, and now President Joe Biden admitted that he believed Hill then and was sorry that she felt that she didn't get a fair hearing. If we fast forwarded to a shipping clerk back in Montana, and she worked at Walmart. And after a while, she couldn't take the harassment anymore, and she had to leave her job because as she bent over to pick up packages, one of her employees remarked, "Now I have found somewhere to put my screwdriver." And at that time, she resigned from the company in 1993, citing that the daily sexual harassment being meted out to her created a hostile working environment. And in 1995, a jury ordered the Walmart stores to pay Peggy $50 million, the largest amount of damages in a sexual harassment case. That would have been 7.4 billion Jamaican dollars today. Right here at home in Jamaica, at the University of the West Indies, Taitu Heron, a lecturer, did a study on whose business is it, violence against women at UEMONA in 2013. And she compiled student reports made to the Office of Security Services on campus. And what Heron reports is that the student group was called into the principal's office and reprimanded for bringing the university to ill repute, quote, end of quote. Heron concluded that the primary concern by the university then was not that the incidences took place against the women, but rather the indignation that the students had expressed the incidents in a public forum. Madam Speaker, sexual harassment is pervasive. And as Claire Barnett from the UN UK describes it, it is a human rights crisis, as a member from Northeast St. Catherine said, whereby women are constantly changing their behavior so as not to be objectified or attacked. At work, they change their behavior. When they leave their homes, they change their behavior. And the root of all of this is a normalization of the idea that a woman's body is a public place and is simply public property, and that young women should just have to put up with this. Philip, pull this for me, please. A survey conducted in the United States in 2015 revealed that 1 in every 3 women 18 to 34 experienced being physically, or should I say sexually, harassed at work. Of the close to 2,300 women that were surveyed, 81% said that the harassment was verbal, and 44% reported unwanted touching. It is also verified that while 75% of the incidents were perpetrated from their male co-workers, only 29% of the women took the decision to make a formal report to their employer. Governments around the world, Madam Speaker, have long recognized that aside from being a violation of human rights, sexual harassment hampers a country's development. And the United Nations said that in 1979. Jamaica was one of the countries that crafted and was committed to the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action under the leadership of the then Minister of Women Affairs, the most honorable Portia Simpson Miller. Upon her elevation to Prime Minister in 2011, she mandated a complete review of several pieces of legislation to include stronger penalties for persons who violated the safety and human development of our women and our children. Consequently, a Parliamentary Joint Select Committee was created to deliberate the Child Care and Protection Act, the Offences of the Persons Act, the Sexual Offences Act, and the Domestic Violence Act. Her unrelenting commitment empowered former Minister of Gender Affairs and the Minister of Justice at the time, both Senator Sandra Faulkner and our current member from South St. Andrew and our leader of the opposition, to begin the process of developing additional legislation with specific sanctions for sexual harassment in the home, workplace, and institutions. By December 8, 2015, a bill entitled, and I quote, "An Act to Make Provision for the Prevention of Sexual Harassment and for Connected Matters," end of quote, was tabled in the Jamaican Parliament by our then Prime Minister, the Most Honorable Portia Simpson Miller. However, by February of the following year, the People's National Party lost the general elections and the bill was not debated. What happened thereafter was a global discussion on the issue of sexual harassment, wherein women around the world descended into social media to share their experiences of how sexual harassment had formalized a structure through which they had been kept sexually enthralled to men and where they were required in one form or another, Madam Speaker, to exchange sexual services for their material survival. This was a tipping point for the hashtag #MeToo movement, which moved dozens of women around the world to divulge publicly that they had been sexually abused and harassed over many, many years by global phenoms such as Bill Cosby and Harvey Weinstein. And we know exactly what has happened to those two men. Right here at home, we have seen over the years newspaper articles of some very prominent men who have been accused by some very prominent women of being sexually harassed in their workplace. And somehow those things disappear or have disappeared. On July 8, 2021, the member from Central St. Catherine, our Minister of Gender Affairs, the Honourable Olivia Babsy-Grange, brought back the bill to Parliament. Madam Speaker, how are we going to get this bill to be fully understood and accepted by Jamaicans? And I ask that as a serious question. For starters, I don't think the bill in and of itself is going to change our ingrained cultural, social norms overnight, but it is a very crucial step in the right direction, Madam Speaker, as it will place a burden on companies, schools, and other institutions to implement stated policies that ban any form of sexual advances or sexual harassment towards their students, employees, or customers that could make them feel uncomfortable. It will also provide support to women and men who feel disenfranchised to stand up for themselves for fear of reprisal or loss of income. So it is a good bill. As a young woman, I recall watching Professor Anita Hill on television as she gave intimate personal details to justify her claims that Justice Clarence Thomas did indeed sexually harass her. And I remember it well. 30 years ago, I remember it very, very well. Now, 30 years later, as Jamaica grapples with overwhelming cases of gender-based violence and other heinous crimes of passion against the most vulnerable among us, especially our women, let us get this bill through the parliamentary process as quickly as possible, recognizing that sexual harassment left unchecked can lead to far more dangerous behavior. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Member Hannah. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think this legislation constitutes a victory, really, for women in Jamaica. Although the legislation is balanced in that a victim may be male or female, a perpetrator may be male or female, everybody knows that this is primarily an issue which women confront in the workplace and in other institutional settings. And it is good that we are finally debating and seeking to pass this sexual harassment legislation. The name of it is changing. It will no longer be called the Sexual Harassment Act, but I think it's going to be called the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act, or something to that effect. As has been said by the member from South East St. Anne, legislation to deal with this problem of sexual harassment was developed in the last People's National Party administration, and we brought that legislation to the Parliament shortly before the end of that term of office. And it came in the name of the then Prime Minister, the Most Honourable Portia Simpson Miller. The elections occurred, the government changed, and it took the new government some time to complete its own review of that bill and to bring another version of the legislation to Parliament. I think it came in 2019, and we're now in 2021, and we are just now getting to the point where we're debating the report of the Joint Select Committee. There are some controversial issues in the bill, as has been highlighted. The notion that you can bring a complaint of sexual harassment up to 6 years after the event, and indeed that the tribunal can extend the period in their discretion would strike some as being very on the long side by international standards, but it is the standard for civil cases generally. Claims for defamation are shorter, but claims for contract breaches or negligence, whether it be oral negligence or motor vehicle negligence, all have a 6-year time bar. So one can very well ask, why would there be some differentiation between the normal time bar for civil claims and a sexual harassment claim? I am a little concerned about the 18-month review period. I think for something like this, which is going to involve establishing a tribunal, its own tribunal, and it's going to involve requiring employers to adopt policies, and it's going to involve a huge cultural shift in how the sexes in Jamaica interact, because many of our people are not particularly shy when it comes to these matters. So it will require an adjustment in behavior for people to comply with this. 18-month period for the review of the legislation, I think, is very short. I think it's too short. I don't think that it's possible, because I don't think the legislation will really get going in that period of time. And it's not particularly helpful to have a review of legislation before it has actually been operational for a period of time and you can see how it's working in practice. We have several pieces of legislation right now where the law requires a review within a period of time, sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5, and where that review hasn't actually started. In other words, where the Parliament is delinquent in that it's not complying with its own legislation to have that review done. Some very important piece of legislation. The Insolvency Act, for example, which needs a review. The Security Interest in Personal Property Act, which needs a review. Those are now well overdue, and have not yet been reviewed. And in both instances, I think well over 5 years has passed for them. So I do think that that is something which ought to be reconsidered. I don't think 18 months is practical. Even the anti-gang legislation, which was reviewed recently and was itself late because there was a 3-year period within which it ought to have commenced. It did not commence within the 3 years, but it commenced 4 or 5 years after the commencement date of the Act. The review did. Even then, by the time that came to Parliament, some of the most important cases involving the use of the Act hadn't even been brought to trial, but because the period of the review took a year, roughly, we did have 2 major cases which came to trial during the process of the review, and one of them resulted in the case collapsing, and the other resulted in some convictions. And important lessons were learned from those trials, large numbers of defendants involved, and that, I think, helped the review process to be more attuned to how to improve the legislation. So I think that 18 months, though I'm sure, and I understand the sentiment behind it, you want to get this thing working quickly and so on, but for the way in which institutions are built, new institutions are built, and the time it will take for people to absorb this and start to use it, I think that's an unduly short period of time. I don't know when the 18 months will commence. The Act itself has allows for different commencement dates for different aspects of the Act, but normally it would run from the first commencement date, whenever that is. And I'd be interested to hear from the Minister when she anticipates bringing the Act into effect. But I think everybody recognizes that for Jamaica, and for the way in the dynamics of relationships in Jamaica, the notion of an unwelcome sexual advance and how that will be adjudicated, and to what extent the recipient of the advance interprets it in a particular way, and the person making the advance may not even realize that that is how they are being interpreted and so on. This is going to require a much more sensitive approach on the part of men in particular in how they relate to females in institutional settings, whether it be clubs or whether it be workplaces and so on. Some of the provisions, like the keeping of a register and so on, I don't know whether that's practical in some workplace settings. I don't know if it applies to all. We don't actually have the bill before us today, although it was tabled a year or two ago, or retabled, I imagine, after the election. But the report itself, it's difficult to tell from the report, every aspect of it. But overall, it is a very important step forward. It has been a long time coming, but we're glad it's here. And as has been said, I think the public education around how it works is going to be critical. I think it's going to require broader discussion around the rights of women and the rights of women's autonomy and the right to be respected, as their agency to be respected by men. These are important issues. We know sexual violence is prevalent. It's very close to home in this Parliament as we stand. And sexual harassment is really one aspect, I think, of gender-based violence, even though it may not necessarily involve physical violence. The idea, though, of a register being required for every setting, Minister, perhaps you could clarify that. Will you need to have a register in a home where if there's a domestic employment arrangement there, or in a small shop where you have one or two attendants working, or or is there a minimum number of employees that must be present before the employer has the obligation to maintain this register? These are some of the things that I think need to be realistic when we're developing legislation. So, Madam Speaker, it's a good day for our Parliament. And I think it's a day that we can all be proud that we have participated in one way or another. I had a role in it in its infancy, prior to the tabling in December 2015 of the first iteration of this legislation. And I know many of the colleagues here would have worked on this bill in the Joint Select Committee process. I'm being reminded that the former Minister of Information, Senator Sandra Faulkner, she then was, had a role in it as well. And I think the process of a Joint Select Committee is an enriching process in a number of respects. It enables legislation that may have been drafted in the heads of a few people in a ministry, or the ideas behind it, and then expressed by the draftsman, to be exposed to a far wider range of inputs over a longer period of time. And it almost inevitably is going to result in a better piece of legislation at the end of the day. We can't have a Joint Select Committee process for every bill because we just don't have the capacity to do that. But for bills that build new institutions or create new obligations, new liabilities, or significant new rights, it is always a useful process and is to be encouraged. And I'm sure that the members who sat on the Joint Select Committee learned a lot by virtue of that process. And the Minister has indicated how proud she is of the way in which the cooperative attitude of the members who were on it, and the fact that she felt very honored to chair it. And I endorse what you've said in that regard, Minister. So congratulations, Minister. This is a big milestone, and we hope that it will, in practice, inure to the benefit of the society as a whole, and that we won't have a whole plethora of claims because people will adjust their behavior accordingly, and we will have a more wholesome and civil approach and a more respectful approach between genders in institutional settings. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you very much, Member Golding. And as I say, ladies before gentlemen, and thank you for being the gentleman that you are, Member Terrelong. Member Daly, he's allowing you to go ahead.
Yes, I'm just saying a few words, Madam Speaker. I want to congratulate our Minister, Minister Grange. I want to say also that she had a level of determination that in spite of all that was happening around us, that we continue having our debates in order that we would be able to speak like this today. And I want to congratulate you, Minister, and the team, your technical staff, and the members from both sides. I want to just ask, though, that we make sure the fact that some of these victims, or supposed to be victims, will have some responsibility in the sense that they will have to make sure that whatever they are saying is true and correct, that we too make sure that they are fully aware of the consequences if there is any false, even if there is part of it, because when it's already gone out, you can't take it back, and we will end up probably sometimes into more problem than the solution. So it is very important that we educate our women, that they know what they are doing, and they understand the roles and function and the rules that governs, so that they will not fall victim again after they are looking for security. Thank you very much.
If it so pleases you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I seek your permission to speak from a seat not being my usual seat in the House. May I continue? Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, I rise to give support to this bill that is now before the House, my lady. My lady, this is an important step in the development of the relationship between men and women in Jamaica. And whilst the proposed legislation, my lady, is gender neutral, in that it recognizes that there should be no sexual harassment or sexual advances made towards our men and also towards our women. Notwithstanding, my lady, the question, yes, the unwelcomed or unwanted, my lady, what is important is that it recognizes that our women in particular, who statistically are oftentimes the victims or the primary victims of unwanted or unwelcomed sexual advances, that they have protection under the law. That is very important. My lady, I recall last year, January 2020, I spoke in this House about toxic masculinity, as I often do in this House, my lady. I spoke about the fact that as a country, as a nation, there are certain cultural traits exhibited by our men that need to be unlearned. And my lady, I have always maintained that being a man is not about how many shoes you have, how many houses you have, how many women you have, how many girls you can brag and boast on the corner with your friends to say, I've had sex with them, my lady. It is not about, say, telling your friends that you control your woman and you can discipline her, and essentially that her body belongs to you and that you're somehow the proprietor of her body and every single thing that she does, to the point where if she decides to leave, then you somehow believe that you can exact some sort of punishment against her, beat her, hit her, kick her, and even in the extreme cases leading to death. So, my lady, it recognizes that women have a degree of autonomy over their own bodies, and that the unwanted sexual advances, Madam Speaker, ought to stop, and that they now have a tribunal that they can report these unwanted advances to. But, my lady, what is also key is that whilst this legislation is groundbreaking, it also provides a great opportunity for us as a nation to have the larger discourse about where we want to go in terms of the interrelations between the sexes in Jamaica. My lady, it requires that our young boys are taught that they are young kings. It requires that our young women are taught that they are young queens. And in so doing, a king must respect his queen, and a queen must respect her king. It also requires that our young men conduct themselves as kings. And this means you care for and you protect the women in your lives. It therefore means, my lady, that offensive behavior, which would see that a woman who perhaps wants employment or is working and wants to continue her employment has to now subject herself to becoming a sexual pawn, whether by an employer or a fellow employee, simply because she wants to earn an honest living. My lady, this act, by its definition, and I'll read for the benefit of those at home, my lady. Sexual advance includes any one or more of the following acts or forms of conduct or behavior, namely, physical conduct of a sexual nature, a demand or request for sex or for favors of a sexual nature, the making of sexual suggestions, remarks, or innuendos, the showing of pornography or the display of images or objects of a sexual nature, and any other physical, gestural, verbal, non-verbal, or visual conduct of a sexual nature. My lady, this act seeks to protect men and women in the workplace, and it also seeks to protect our students in institutions. In fact, it seeks to protect anyone in an institution. It could be a mental institution. But my lady, as it relates to our educational institutions, it provides that level of protection for our students, because we have heard of cases where students have been victims in institutions of unwanted sexual advances, my lady. My lady, I've also noted that there is a provision in Section 39 which sets out a fine of $1 million upon conviction where an employer or someone who heads an institution believes that, well, me can't bother go to tribunal. Yes, this complaint was made against me and it's frivolous, it's foolish. Me not go. And my lady, the law compels them to present themselves to the tribunal. And if, as an employer, you have somehow made an unwanted sexual advance against an employee and that employee lodges a complaint and you choose, foolishly, to disregard it, then this bill, the provisions of the proposed legislation, says that you can be fined $1 million for not turning up. My lady, Madam Speaker, my fellow member from St. Catherine spoke about the fine as it relates to falsely accusing other persons as well. So I need not go over it more than to mention that I'm in agreement with the provisions of Section 41, which provide for that as well. Because, again, the balance of the legislation is not just in the fact that it is gender neutral, but also that it provides a fine for someone who falsely makes an accusation, and again for someone against whom an accusation has been made and who fails to turn up to that tribunal. My lady, many of the things have been spoken of, but whilst I hail the legislation as groundbreaking, I would like to posit nonetheless that I believe that in time, I would like to see us go further as a society. Whilst we have covered spaces of employment, and whilst we have covered institutions, we need to go a little further, and we now need to cover public spaces generally. My lady, in March, I remember it was a year post-COVID, in March, a young lady in Gregory Park came to me and she said, MP, I am sick and tired every time I go to a particular place. And I'm not saying it was in Gregory Park, but she mentioned the place that she goes to. She says, Madam Speaker, the amount of people that they're calling at her and they're saying these most vulgar things. You know, big this, big that, big this, big that, and groping or grabbing at her, and just the words that they use to describe her body parts. My lady, Madam Speaker, she says she found it so offensive. She's perpetually disgusted by it all. And my lady, Madam Speaker, I keep saying my lady because of the courtroom practice. Madam Speaker, and she's not the only one. There are several women in Jamaica who find it completely disgusting. But, Madam Speaker, again, the cultural practice and the cultural norm is such that, you know, as a man, you feel like, yeah, you have to comment. And you might want to comment. And you do comment. But, my lady, if you comment in such a vulgar way that you rob the woman of her very dignity and you strip her down to a piece of meat, my lady, that you want to just have your way with, then, my lady, that has to become actionable at some point in our society. Because it robs our women again of the freedom to dress how they want to dress. You cannot have a modern society where you dictate to your woman that it's your fault because you dress this particular way. If you never wear the shorts them, or the skirt there, or them tight jeans there, then this would not have happened to you. And my lady, we use our woman's dress to rob her of control of her own body, to justify unwanted sexual advances, and also to justify rape in extreme cases as well. And so, my lady, I would like to see us take on, in the future, dealing with and treating with unwanted sexual harassment in public spaces as well. That would include the sort of vulgar catcalling and so forth. And finally, my lady, as we speak about the re-education of our population, my lady, both men and women would also have to learn how to recognize inappropriate sexual advances. Because the truth is, my lady, there are some persons who might take a sexual advancement as a compliment, whilst not recognizing that it is in fact harassment. And there are some persons, my lady, who believe that, well, it's a Jamaican thing. I just part of the culture. Like, yeah, mom, it's supposed to can say this or supposed to can say that. So again, my lady, this sort of re-education, so unlearning in one aspect and relearning in the other aspect, is important for us to have this piece of legislation being a successful piece of legislation. And I believe that the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Education and Information are poised, perfectly poised, to launch such cultural educational shifts by virtue of relearning and re-educating our population to understand the bill and understand what sexual harassment is. And finally, my lady, I want to thank the members of the Joint Select Committee for stellar work headed by our Chief Minister, the Honourable Babsy Grange, and also, my lady, to thank members of civil society and organisations like Jamaicans for Justice and Women's Inc. who contributed to the discussions. In particular, my lady, I want to single out the Jamaica Household Workers Union for their contribution that was made, because oftentimes, my lady, our helpers, persons who work within the homes, my lady, are sometimes the victims, the silenceable victims of these sort of dastardly acts of unwanted sexual abuse, my lady. So I thank them too for their contribution.
Thank you very much, Member Terry Long.
Madam Speaker, in closing, I wish to thank all those who made contributions to the debate. But I wish to respond or to highlight 2 or 3 points. One is to where a person is sexually harassed and is unable to get redress because utilization of the complaint mechanism will open up such a person to extreme prejudice, that person can go directly to the tribunal. Also, the committee agreed in its deliberations that authorized officers should not be tasked to investigate complaints under the Act, but to instead enforce compliance in workplaces and institutions as well. And the committee further agreed that any investigation of complaints would be done through specialized officers that the tribunal will engage for that purpose. So I just wanted to highlight those points. Now, Madam Speaker, truly this piece of legislation will protect all women and men from unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and crude sexual behaviors that affect quality of life by creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. This bill will send a very strong message. This bill will require intense public education. This bill will require a culture change in behavior. We have to start with education and cultural changes. And this bill will require genuine mutual respect for each other. So, Madam Speaker, I ask at this time that the report before the House be approved.
Members, the question before the House is that the report be approved. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister, you are
Madam Speaker, this Honourable House would have seen numerous amendments in the report of the Joint Select Committee, which was earlier approved by this House, for incorporation in the bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Act 2020. In accordance with Standing Order number 63, I will now seek the leave of this House for the bill to be withdrawn and for a new bill to be tabled, which will incorporate all the amendments in the approved report.
Members, you have all heard the request of the Minister. Is it your wish that the bill before us be withdrawn and a new bill be tabled incorporating the amendments in the report that we have approved earlier? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The bill is now...
Madam Speaker? Madam
yes,
Speaker?
Table.
I know, yes. The bill is now being tabled, Madam Speaker.
Yes. So.
While it's being tabled, Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the items relating to motions, notice of motions given orally, be recommitted to enable the Minister to table the bills. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
I now ask for, the question is that the item notices of motions given orally be recommitted to enable the Minister to table the bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. So now we move to notices of motions given orally. Minister?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to introduce the bill and have it read a first time and to give notice of and take its second reading.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the Minister to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021, to give notice of and take second reading of the bill and take it through all its concluding stages. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Minister?
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021, to give notice of and take second reading of the bill and to take it through all its concluding stages.
The question is that the bill entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021 be now read a first time.
A bill shortly entitled the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021 read a first time.
Minister.
Madam Speaker, at this point, I just want to indicate that all the persons who have
contributed, yeah. She's correct.
Madam Speaker, I now ask for the second reading of the bill. Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bill.
The question is that the bill be read as Minister, I'm inviting you to close the debate. Aren't you?
Madam Speaker, at this point, I would wish to allow members who are not here today to have an opportunity to make contribution at another time. And so, rather than closing the debate, I wish to ask for the suspension of the debate.
Therefore, is that the debate on the bill, the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act 2021, be suspended. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The debate on this act is now suspended.
Madam Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. So I move, Madam Speaker, that you adjourn this Honorable House for the next sitting to be on Tuesday, the 13th of July at 2 p.m. in the George William Gordon House. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
The question before the House is that the House be adjourned until next Tuesday, the 13th of July at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? This House is now adjourned.